Shabbat Shalom. I want to begin this evening's D'var Torah with a story. It was told that once a Hasid visited the great Maggid, one of the early leaders of Hasidism. And he came to the great Maggid's home and he found that it was empty of nearly anything. The room that he met the Maggid in had but 2 chairs, and simple at that. So the man who owned a furniture store said to the great Maggid that he would like to provide the Maggid with furniture to fill his home. So the Maggid turned to him and said, "Do you have the furniture with you?" To which the Hasid replied, "No, now I'm on a journey." The Maggid turned to him and said the same, "Now I too am on a journey." This last week, I played what would likely be my last visit to Sensoji, the vast and ancient Buddhist temple complex in Asakusa, Tokyo. I've been there many times and it's one of the most famous tourist centers in Tokyo. This time, however, the visit was strangely surreal. At midday, there was hardly a tourist to be seen, really hardly anybody to be seen. Vendors at the food stands looked hungrily at the few people making their way to the temple. And the usually smiling and vocal young rickshaw men also stood silently and sadly, waiting for couples to pull around the temple precincts. As has been my custom, I drew an omikuji, a fortune printed on a long slip of paper, for one last time. Omikuji are a widespread Japanese tradition, found at many shrines and temples. A box is shaken until a bamboo stick inscribed with a kanji pops out. The kanji, a Chinese character, leads to a fortune which reveals your future. These range from a terrible curse to the highest excellent fortune. The Japanese, however, are pragmatic, unwilling to be weighed down by a curse or even mildly bad fortune. Therefore, when you get a terrible omikuji, you merely fold it up and tie it onto a wire provided, which are usually filled already with unwanted omikuji, and allow the bad luck to blow away in the wind. Good fortune, of course, you take with you. On this last visit, I was blessed with the highest excellent fortune. It was amazingly appropriate and hopeful for me as I looked to continue my pilgrimage, moving from Japan back to North America. The omikuji always begins with a few sentences containing the essence of the fortune. Mine was quite uplifting. You should keep a public and right way without selfishness. Never mind the blame of others, always do your best. It was profound if general advice. I especially like the metaphoric climax. Like a pine tree and a camellia are always green, never change, keeping sincerity. And it ended with a promise of abundant fortune and happiness as you move on into the future. The second section of the omikuji is always more specific, covering everything from health and happiness, lost articles, and even journeys. Here again, everything was hopeful. It said, "My request will be granted. The patient will get well. Moving to a new house will be successful. The person you wait for will come. And now is a great time to start a journey." I must admit, I was much relieved, well, perhaps a bit more amused, as a new stage in Shelley and my life journey is beginning in but a few weeks. A journey in the time of COVID seems strange and a bit quixotic, but my omikuji helped to confirm my faith. There was time to move on again on our pilgrimage of life. Successful journeys and pilgrimages take just this kind of faith, impelled by a willingness to take risks facing the future with hope and trusting in God. It is just the challenge that faced our ancestors in this week's Parsha. Like me, Indeed, like all of us, our ancestors were amid a pilgrimage. Not long after leaving Egypt and Sinai, they stood at the very borders of the Promised Land. Yet at the last moment, faith failed them. They fell short, believing the negative reports of the 10 prince spies, rather than the realistic yet faith-driven words of Caleb and Joshua. Because of their lack of faith in God, our ancestors were fated to spend 40 years in the desert. A whole generation would die, and only the new generation, led by Joshua and Caleb, would still driven by faith, would enter the land. Despite tragic missteps, with capable leadership from Moses and Miriam to later Joshua and Caleb, our ancestors' journey continued, and we are the heirs of this journey. Rabbis from the mystical and Hasidic tradition teach that the long Exodus pilgrimage from Egypt to Eretz Yisrael, with its ups, and especially in the first few Parshaot of Bamidbar, downs, is not only a recounting of our ancestors' journey, but as importantly, it's a metaphoric reflection of the spiritual journey of every human on their personal pilgrimage towards the divine, the journey of the soul. Each of us, our rabbis teach, begins within the narrow confines of materiality, reflected by Mitzrayim, Egypt, which literally means a narrow space. We then have the possibility, depending on our spiritual choices, to grow and move on a pilgrimage towards the world of Ruchaniyut, of spirit, the world of spiritual connection with the divine. Each of our internal pilgrimages will have highs and lows. Sometimes we will feel that we're standing on the very foot of Sinai, perceiving a hint of the very essence of the divine. Other times, we'll listen to the spies taking backward steps in our journey. But if we persevere, we'll move closer and closer to the promised land. God is reaching out to us, and it will hopefully be our choice to reach back. In our Jewish tradition, our physical and spiritual pilgrimages are best not attempted in isolation, but as part of a community. Therefore, Zoom is so essential at this moment. As a community, we can strengthen each other with encouragement and hope. Indeed, the census at the very beginning of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, reminds us that each of us is an integral part of the puzzle, an integral part of the people Israel. And each of our individual spiritual epiphanies is essential to our necessary limited understanding of a divine beyond all definition. As we move together and support each other on our multifaceted pilgrimage, we create a Kehila Kadosha, a holy community. Over the years, Shelach L'cha, this week's Parsha, has formed a coincidental rhythm in my rabbinate and my journey. As I flew to my first congregation in Glasgow, Scotland, I spent the flight writing what would be my first D'var Torah as an ordained rabbi on this very Parsha. And indeed, it was also the first Parsha that I spoke on here in Tokyo. Coincidentally, 25 years later, I was again in Scotland for just one Shabbat, speaking on precisely the same Parsha, though I doubt I said the same things. Now again, I write, and this time very new things, and will speak on Shelach L'cha as Shelley and I continue our journey from Tokyo to Syracuse. Naomi Kuji was promising, and I believe, with faith in God, that we're ready to take the next steps on our pilgrimage. We have been spiritually enriched by our time with the Jewish community of Japan and look forward to sharing our continuing journey with our new community at Beth Shalom Chevra Shas in Syracuse. Shabbat Shalom.